It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulson and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. Craig Hoffman here. Logan Paulson there. Happy Thursday, everybody. It is time to rank defensive football players in groupings within the NFC East. I'm just
well
like,
done.
How
good on that intro, man. That was excellent.
How many words can I say to say what we're doing? It's our NFC East positional group rankings. This time the defense edition, and it's so funny how we have the same epiphany every year, and it's like, oh, we should also do. Oh wait, we did that last year. Next week on this show, so the late week show. Of course, our mailbag will be early in the week. We're gonna rank the coaches in the NFC East. We did that last year. It goes very well. Nobody gets mad. And we do it perfectly. And so we're going to do head coaches, OCs, DCs next week. So look forward to that. But for today, the defense, Logan. And we're going to start along the defensive line. We'll hit the linebackers and then get back into the secondary. And I think this is interesting when you look at these defensive lines in this division, because I feel like there's a couple that have like big potential upside, but also some low floor, including the Commanders. You have an Eagles team that's still very good and arguably has the best player in the division in Jalen Carter. But they also lost a lot of depth, and they're maybe second best guy on that line in Milton Williams, certainly second best interior player. And then you have the Giants, who everyone is sad if you're in New York after the offensive rankings, but your D-line's really, really good.
Yeah,
and
very, very good.
I actually think we might have a Giants logo at the top of the graphic here. But where are you at with where you want to start with the defensive line groups in this division?
Yeah, this was a really tough process. You know, kind of like looking through your notes, looking at sack production, looking at players, looking at kind of and trying to distinguish like pedigree. Because I think you brought it up with Philly. Like I look at Jalix Hunt, right, who was not an overly productive player last year, and like he had moments of flash, and I think the last two games, specifically the playoff run, he looked really, really good. But if you kind of look prior to that, he was kind of, I don't want to say middling because I think he's a good player, but like he's still a developmental edge rusher, like Nolan Smith, still a developmental edge rusher, right? So even though they're these big names, right, and like when you look at like Philadelphia's offseason camp, like everyone's talking about how good Jalix Hunt looks, how he's going to take on this pass rushing role, blah, blah, but he hasn't done it yet, right? So even Nolan Smith, I think Nolan Smith is a really good run player. I think he's a good football player, but like in terms of adding pass rush, like which unit's going to be the most dominant? And then you've got Jalen Carter. They lost Milton Williams. So I think that's like a sneaky loss because like when you go back and watch games, like he's not as disruptive, but he's a disruptive element to that group. So I didn't really know where to lie with this. So ultimately, like I think if I had to like gun to my head, like the group that I'm most afraid of right now, and again, where do we? January, whatever the date is, June 24th.
June 24th.
Yeah. Like,
you know what's cool about January 24th? I think the Commanders were still playing in the playoffs at that point.
That's pretty wild, isn't it?
Which is cool.
Yeah. So I think the one for me that sticks out is probably the New York Giants. Like, I just think about Brian Burns last year. He had a really good year, 10 sacks. He had 46 hurries last year, which is incredible. Dexter Lawrence, you mentioned Jalen Carter. Dexter Lawrence might be the best player in the division, like full stop,
yes.
Which is a crazy conversation to be having about a nose guard. And I think when you look at his first, was it 8, 9 games, maybe 10 games, he was the best player in the NFL. And obviously he cooled as the year went on, but like that's the kind of talent you're talking about. And that's not like long time ago. That was last year. He was one of the more dominant players in the division. I think he had close to 10 sacks. Kayvon Thibodeau has never been super productive, but you bring in the first pick, or what is he? The first pick overall, right? In edge rusher, right? Second pick?
Third pick.
Third pick, right? So
yeah.
Really like, and in terms of thinking back to, and we talked about biases on the last show, right? Like, I don't know if there's going to be a more dynamic edge rusher that I've evaluated coming out of college than Abdul Carter, right? So I look at that group and I'm like, that group seems absolutely terrifying. And then I think they did a good job of adding some depth pieces here this offseason with guys like Robinson, who was in Jacksonville last year, but he's like this good 5 technique with some pass rush upside. And I think about him next to Dexter Lawrence. I'm like, man, that could be a pretty devastating combination. So as of right now, like that to me feels like the group that's going to be really dynamic. And then you brought in Darius Alexander also, who's kind of this hyper athletic, long from Toledo, defensive
Yeah. A lot
tackle,
of
like
people
in the
liked him.
rotation there. So again, I think Philly's got some really good football players on the roster. I do think you're asking them to project in a way, and here I am talking about projection and Abdul Carter. But I think with Burns, I think he's probably outside of Micah Parsons, maybe the best edge rusher in the division. And then you've got Dexter Lawrence, and then you've got all these really nice kind of athletic depth pieces around the interior. And I'm really going to bet on Abdul Carter to be good. And then you throw Kayvon Thibodeau as like your third guy, who was a former was he top 10 pick? I don't remember.
He was top 5 pick. I think he was the 5th pick.
Yeah. So like, I don't know, man. Like that feels like a really dynamic, deep group. And again, like they were really productive last year. Like they were crazy productive last year. So
Yeah.
why would anything be different this year? And they've just gotten more talented, at least on paper.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is the best group in the division. And something that I should have said before we even dove into the D-line, just to take a step back real quickly. And it had the perfect opportunity, Logan, because we were teasing the coaches show next week. But like last year, remember, part of what made these rankings so difficult, especially the coach rankings, but also the defensive position group rankings, is we had no idea how anybody was going to get used because all 4 defensive coordinators were brand spanking new. This year, you have Eberflus in Dallas, going back where he was the linebackers coach, before he got his DC job in Indy and then the head job in Chicago. But other than that, everyone's back for their second year. So we have a much better idea schematically of how these guys are going to be used. Like Shane Bowen is still there in New York, and we'll say what we think of Shane Bowen next week. But at least we know, like, okay, fundamentally, Dexter Lawrence is going to do X for Shane Bowen, and Brian Burns is going to do Y for Shane Bowen, and the body types that he likes, the guys that succeed, the guys that don't. And when you look at what they've got, like they've got high end guys like Lawrence, Burns, Carter, if he can produce as a rookie, and they have depth. They have guys, down, whether it's high upside depth like Alexander, or some guys that have a little bit more, staying power in the league. Guys like Chauncey Golston is there on the outside. He's just like, nondescript NFL pro, but like a pro. And there's a lot of those guys, obviously in Washington. Like I do think
even
New York,
Nunez Roches, you know what I mean? Like he's been in the league for like 20 years. And that's not a lie, but like 15 years, 12 years, something like that. And he's just a good, solid 4-eye.
Yeah. I mean, Elijah Chapman made some plays for them last year. I remember watching the Commanders games and be like, oh, that dude flash. He's now a 3rd string for them, a defensive tackle.
Yeah, no, and I even go down the list. Like you got DJ Davidson, he's excellent. Elijah Chapman, did you just mention him? Like he was awesome last year for them.
Yeah, he was great.
In terms of being explosive, dynamic, like in terms of line stunts, some of the stuff they were doing with him. So yeah, like I don't know, man. Like it just seems like they've got a lot of depth. Seems like that's a strength of the team. Seems like that's a strength of the position in the division. And I don't know, like it feels weird again. And I'm kind of valuing Abdul Carter here in a very high way. But I just think if you put him as a true stand-up edge, the way he can drop, the way he can rush, like he had one of the best first step get-offs I've ever seen in college. You know what I'm saying? And so like, does that translate? I'm going to say yes. And so I don't know. It just seems like they've got a lot of depth, a ton of depth of like quality depth, and they've got some really high end talent. So to me, this feels like the best group in the division.
Yeah, for sure. Then it becomes 2, 3, 4, obviously, and we haven't talked about Dallas or Washington at all yet. But to kind of circle back to Philly real quick, like Carter, if it's not Lawrence, he's probably the best player in the division on the defensive side of the ball. Or certainly Parsons. On the D line. I mean, I guess Parsons. Yeah. Duh. But Carter's awesome. He's a guy that could eventually make Myles Garrett's making like $40 million now. Like, is he and Micah are the next maybe $40 million defensive players, considering what the value that they bring, and the skill sets they bring. I think Nolan Smith is a really fascinating guy because he's thinner, was he weigh like 240 as an edge? Yeah. People are like, oh man, he's just like, and he runs a 4.3. So, speed rusher. And it's like, that's actually not who he is at all as a player.
He's better run defender for sure.
He's a run defender, and he's really, really, really good at it. And specifically in this division, the ability to chase down a mobile quarterback, namely Jaden Daniels, is a really important aspect. So even though he's not like a great pass rusher, his edge setting and his ability to maintain the pocket and keep control contain on the edge in a way that's a little bit different athletically is a really valuable skill. You combine that with Carter, Jordan Davis, And then the problem is, I think for Philly, is the depth kind of fades away. I mean, Hunt is obviously interesting. We'll see what Azeez Ojulari is, but that interior depth is not quite as strong as it has been unless some of these young guys pan out. I do think that Philly's probably earned the benefit of the doubt over the years when it comes to defensive linemen.
Sure.
I would trust that they probably have drafted well, and that 1, 2, or all of these guys are going to work out just fine.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I think Josh Uche is a good player. Like he was in New England last year, like very solid edge, kind of crafty rusher. Azeez Ojulari, we've talked about a lot. He's in New York and skilled, and if you just want to rush the passer, like that's what he'll be able to do for you. But it is weird looking at the roster, looking at the depth chart here, and kind of be like, man, there's no established guy in the perimeter in the way that they've always had Brandon Graham. They've always had somebody.
I don't think we mentioned Josh Sweat's departure is obviously an enormous thing here, him going to Arizona.
Yeah. And then, who was the guy that, I forget his name, that signed in with the New York Jets? Hassan Reddick. Yeah. They've always had somebody on the perimeter that's been very productive, been established. And even Brian Burns the specialty edge rusher from New York, the little short guy who didn't play for them. But they've had guys that have been very productive over the course of their career. And then you're asking kind of some younger players who I think are good players. I like these players a lot. Nolan Smith, Jalen Hugg, I like them a lot, but I do think there's a little bit of a developmental arc. And then you go to the interior and Jordan Davis, I like what he does, but he's always a little bit inconsistent, and I think that's something Philly fans have been very quick to kind of point out. And when you watch him, you're like, man, that here's this crazy splash play where he's forcing the pressure or he's splitting a double team and he gets quiet for a couple plays. And so can he achieve that level of dominance that I think a lot of people thought he was going to be the next Dexter Lawrence, right? And he has not played to that level. Obviously, Jalen Carter has been as advertised. Moro Ajomo, I like a lot. Moro Ajomo, I like a lot as a kind of rotational guy. He'll probably be their pass rush guy in sub, which I think is a nice way to kind of offset some of those interior departures. But it doesn't feel like it's got the same kind of teeth to it that it's had. I'm not saying it's a bad group, right. Philly fans calm down, but does it have that dominant player to offset Jalen Carter, to support him? And I think you're kind of relying on, again, Hunt and Smith to kind of take those steps, which is totally a reasonable expectation. But how does that compare to Dallas, with Micah Parsons and some of those other guys that are really kind of more established, more consistent football players?
So speaking of, Dante Fowler returns to Dallas. He obviously had a monster production year, but is a complicated player beyond the stats. That he goes back to Dallas as a pass rush option for them. They lose Tank Lawrence in the offseason. He goes to Denver. Mozzie Smith was better in year 2 than year 1. Year 1 was bad. Year 2 was fine. We'll see what he can be in year 3. They re-sign Osia Odighizuwa, who's a very, very good player on the interior. Obviously, Micah. They also draft or bring in Marshawn Nealand, or have Marshawn Nealand, I should say, they drafted last year. Solomon Thomas, the veteran, is there now as a backup on the interior. They draft Ezeraku as well, who obviously we spent a lot of time talking about. We thought he could be an option here as a pass rush kind of guy. This is an interesting group because I think there are some really, potentially, if Ezeraku hits, man, that's a steal guy considering what he was in college. Yeah. They've got obviously Micah. Dante Fowler in the right spot is a really, really dangerous player. But the thing is, he's currently listed as the guy starting opposite of Micah. Sure. And if Micah Parsons, now Micah, even though he's this pass rush maniac, is also a nasty edge setter. So Micah being a starting defensive end is actually fine. Even if body type wise he's quote unquote right? light. It's oh, that's not what defensive ends look like. Oh, he plays like that? Yeah. Fine. Yeah. But Dante Fowler being opposite of that is interesting to me. And I also do wonder if, it was one thing when Tank Lawrence, who was a big, prototypical massive 4-3 defensive end, his nickname was freaking Tank. When that's the guy that's opposite of Micah, how do offenses adjust now that they don't have to necessarily worry about that other side because they don't have that size on the opposite side? And are there some things they can do to try to temper Micah's impact, especially as a run defender, and not to mention some of the pass rush stuff that he's able to do and where he's always going to get extra attention?
Yeah, I just want to point out that they do have guys with some size there. Like Peyton Turner, we saw him last year in New Orleans. He's like one of the freakier defensive end body types in the NFL. He's like kind of the 35-inch, 6'6", 6'7", 280-pound guy that always seems to manifest out of New Orleans because they draft those guys at a high level. So like they could easily put him out there. And I don't think he's a great pass rusher, but I think on first, second down, when healthy, that's a big caveat with him. Like he's a pretty like consistent player. Marshawn Nealon was a guy they drafted in the second round, if I'm not mistaken, who I loved coming out of Western Michigan. Is that right?
Yep.
And
Western Michigan, second round pick, 56
very physical,
overall
high
last year.
motor. So I think getting a guy like their depth there again is not bad. And I think I just want to point out another kind of sneaky signing or drafting of Jay Toya, who to me was the best run stopping defensive tackle, nose guard type player in the draft last year. He's like 355. He's got short, stubby arms. He's kind of built like a fire hydrant, but out of UCLA, played a part of that great defense at UCLA. So I think he could be an awesome kind of fit there to offset some of Mozzie Fist's deficiencies. However, after going through it a little bit, I do feel like the group in Philly is just way more consistently good. I think the floor for Philly is so much higher because of coaching, because of utilization, because of how they play just generally. Here, it just feels like a lot's got to come together. I'm not saying it won't, but you mentioned like Fowler, Peyton Turner, you're asking him to kind of exceed expectations. Marshawn Nealon, who I really liked in his limited snaps last year, again, is coming into a bigger role. What does that look like? I think Ja is probably going to play a lot for them in terms of run stopping downs on first, second down. Like rookie player, Donovan Ziraku projection. Like we loved him as a prospect, but it just feels like the ceiling is probably pretty high, but I think the floor is also pretty low. Much like we talked about their offensive line. Like I feel really good about this group, but I think a lot of pieces kind of got to fit together in a way that Philly's defensive line, that's not really the case. Like, Hunt is an excellent run defender on the edge. Nolan Smith is an excellent run defender. Jordan Davis is excellent in the run defense game. Moro Ojomo is excellent in the run defense. And so sometimes I think when you just have a solid run defending, physical, hard hat group, it just sets the table in a really nice way. And then on top of that, you kind of say to yourself, okay, there's some pass rush upside in here also. So I'm going to bet Philly here at 2 and probably go Dallas at 3 if I had to categorize it.
So that leaves us with Washington.
Yeah.
And we have spent quite a bit of time, Logan Paulson, talking about the Washington Commanders defensive line this offseason. We like a lot of things that happened here, which I think is an important thing to say, because when you talk about a solid run defense, it looks like they could have it. They shored up the edge with guys like Dietrich Wise, bringing back Cleveland Ferrell, who was good last year until he was hurt, and then he wasn't very good, but the injury clearly was having an impact. Dorrance Armstrong, obviously, he signed a 3-year deal when he signed, so he's back. And then, Jalen Holmes, who played really well for them at times last year. And then they have all the girth inside with Payne. They signed Kinlaw, Jerzon Newton. They signed Eddie Goldman. They bring back Carl Davis and Sheldon Day. So Javonte Jean-Baptiste, another name that should mention. Like that's a lot of dudes who are good NFL football players that they have. It's just that the upside is not necessarily there unless Newton takes a huge step or Payne plays at a level that he hasn't played at in a couple of years, especially or produces at a level he hasn't in a couple of years, or Kinlaw clicks. And it's just a lot of ors and a lot of what ifs. And considering the quality of the others in Dallas, we talked about the what ifs, but like they also have Micah Parsons. Right. Does that just by default leave Washington 4th?
I think when you were talking through it, I was like, well, what's really the difference between the two groups? And it's definitely Micah Parsons. It's like his ceiling and what he brings, his ability to create. Like just watching those two, I went back and watched those 2 games from last year that Washington played against them. Yeah. His ability to just kind of take over a game, like the way like Kobe Bryant would, like isolation basketball, like I'm rushing over a guard, like good luck blocking me, or I'm going to beat this tackle. Like his ability to create TFL sacks, quick wins, like to not blitz the way they didn't at points last year, and for him to create the pressure, I thought was really impressive. So I just wanted to say, I do think, I like Dorrance a lot. I think he's going to get about 10 sacks this year. That's how confident I am he's going to play well, right? Duran, I think, is a really, really, really good football player. But is he an elite player the way some of those other interior players we talked about are? At this moment, no, right? I think Kinlaw has a tremendous ceiling. But has he done it recently? There's flashes of it, but not the consistency, right? Dietrich Wise, I think, is the most kind of consistent get on base selection at that left defensive end spot you could possibly want. but we're not talking about high floor players here. We're talking about what's going to elevate the ceiling of this group. And when you compare it to, some of these other edge rushers we talked about, like I've been very open about how much I like Dietrich Wise. Like he's going to get you 5 sacks this year, right? And he's going to play great run defense on first, second down. But like there's the ceiling isn't there the same way that is with some of these other players. And so, yeah, Cleveland Farrell kind of in the same bucket. I think Eddie Goldman's a really sneaky addition, but he's a sneaky addition because he fills a certain type of role in this defense, right? So I think like that's where you say like you're banking on the oars, like a lot of projection from Jerzon, a lot of projection from Kinlaw. And if those guys hit, oh my gosh, like watch out, we're going to be a pretty dominant group. But again, there's still, I think even if those guys playing at really high level football, I don't know if they have the ceilings of some of those other players we were just talking about, like a Diggy Zua, for example. Like I don't know if he's always kind of a 8-9 sack kind of guy, creates a ton of pressure in the backfield. Like I don't know if there's a guy like that on the roster right now for the Washington Commanders, and we'll see. And I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that this staff does a good job getting the best out of him. But I do think the floor is improved. I don't know what the ceiling is for this group.
Yeah, I think the floor might be higher than Dallas's because I think like still if the Mozzie Smith thing doesn't work, Adigi Zua is a great penetrator, but like that's a very specific kind of player. And your guy out of UCLA is a rookie. Like there's a chance that they just get run all over right straight up the gut again. And Micah becomes less effective because they're never in pass rush situations. There's only so much he can do as a run defender because it's a kind of a weak link type system. So there's a chance obviously that it doesn't go well. And I also think like the gap here isn't like New York is really, really good. The gap between like Philly and kind of the guesswork between Philly, Dallas, Washington, I could see all 3 of those being in any of the spots by the end of the year. But I think if we're going into it and we're being honest with ourselves, despite the fact that this is a Washington Commanders podcast and we have spent lots of time talking about how we think they made smart strategic moves that will help the defense as a whole this offseason relative to the other 3, they're coming in at 4th.
And you took the words right out of my mouth. Like, I think this group is better. I think it makes the defense better, right? And I think ultimately, if you're better on first, second down, we've talked about this before, like you are better on second and long. You're better on third and long. I think these are all good moves. But if you're just looking at the group in isolation and not in the context of the defense, not in the context of the offense that they're playing with, I think it's important just to kind of be like, hey, they might not be as talented as some of these other groups in the division. Because like you talked about, Micah Parsons is going to be probably the highest defensive paid player here very shortly, right? Dexter Lawrence is, again, at times the best defensive player in the NFL. Jalen Carter, same thing. So there's lots of really uber talented people. And as of right now, the Commanders don't have that guy. But as we talked about, like sometimes just playing great run defense and being where you're supposed to be is exactly what you need from the defense. And that might end up being valuable enough for this group.
There are 3 $30+ million defenders in the division. The Commanders do not have one of them. And that is kind of how it ultimately comes down. Take Command Podcast, NFC East Positional Rankings Edition. Don't look at me like that, Logan. Like I forgot my phrasing to try to make it. This is like the running joke. That'll be, if you know, once a year, Craig tries to efficiently say, NFC East Positional Group Rankings.
It was good, man. You did a good job.
Thanks.
It was the pump fake that got me. Little peek behind the veil there. Yeah, no.
People listening, they don't know that I pump fake unless Evan really does me dirty and just leaves me false starting in the final edit. Anyway, the point is we've reached the linebacker portion of the program. I'll run through the starters real quick. Obviously, as we go, we will also talk about some of the depth pieces. But in Washington, really kind of a 2 linebacker starter system. Luvu and Wagner. They also have some interesting guys in depth that most people listening know about, but we can talk about as we go. Man, imagine last year being like, hey, yeah, Zach Bond. What? We didn't know. They didn't know at this point last year. But Zach Bond back in Philadelphia. N'Kobe Dean coming off the injury. Other name I'll mention, they also drafted Jahad Campbell in the first round. Cowboys, their middle linebacker on ESPN.com's depth chart is Jack Sanborn. They have Demarion Overshawn coming off of the injury. Kenneth Murray as well. They're a base 4-3, so I'll give you 3 there. And then for New York, Okereke and McFadden are the 2 names that are the big guys there. in the middle. And again, New York has a really, really good group. I think we actually ranked them first last year. I would say Washington did have 2 second-team All-Pros. Yeah. That seems relevant. I do think Washington has a chance to be atop the chart here, but this is in general an interesting position because of all the things that we've talked about over the years of how linebackers play in the 2023, 2024, 2025 NFL.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the best linebacker in the division, it's got to be Zach Bond. Like, I don't know if there's any conversation about that. Like, I mean, he's like
he was the first team All-Pro guy ahead of Wagner and Louvu.
He's amazing. You know, like the way he covers, the way he can rush, the way he fits runs. Like, he's what you want at the position. I think the thing that I struggle with that group right now is on paper, like Nakobe Dean, when healthy, is a good player. Jihad Campbell, when healthy, could be a dominant player, but he's a rookie coming off a shoulder. Both those guys are coming off injuries right now. And I don't think either one of them participated in OTAs or minicamp for the Eagles, which leaves Jeremiah Trotter, who I think is a fine football player, but is a fourth kind of rotational special teams guy with kind of a cerebral upside. So depending on where, like, this could easily be, this is definitely maybe the most talented room, you know, like Jihad Campbell, like you watched this film, Craig, like, yeah, he's a freak, dude. He is freaky mover.
Although the thing is, like, I like him more as an edge rusher than I do as a linebacker.
Sure.
Which I don't know what to do with that. But then again, like, so I like Frankie more as a blitzer than I do like out in space. So like that's the encapsulation of the weirdness of this position in the modern NFL.
Yeah, but I kind of wonder, like, does he start the year on PUP? Like, does it slow his progression? Like, and again, like when you look at how they use Zach Bond, like they blitz him a lot, they use him in coverage a lot. Like, I think Jihad Campbell, it's weird. Like when I watched him, I had a lot of Zach Bond vibes, like in terms of utilization. Like he can rush the passer. Like Zach Bond's a former defensive end, right? Like there's a lot of crossover there. But the health of the position is something here that I'm a little uncertain about. Jihad Campbell being a rookie, like it's one of those things that is also tough because like linebacker, you just need like a ton of reps, you know? And so like everyone says, oh, look at this freaky athlete at linebacker. It's like, yeah, historically that doesn't usually pan out to like year 3 or 4 of them kind of seeing all the combinations and patterns. Now it helps that they're playing behind one of the best defensive lines in football, like we just talked about, probably the second best defensive line in the division. But I would probably look to New York here. Okereke. Did we decide on
Okereke? I believe is how it goes.
Okereke. I think he's, again, awesome. Big, long, athletic. McFadden, I love how he plays football. That's a really nice dynamic duo. But then I come to Washington and I say, like, you got a guy who's going to have a gold jacket on here very shortly in Bobby Wagner. Like what he does from a command of the defense standpoint is tremendous. I think he's going to be helped a lot by the defensive line. Like going back and watching some games, especially early last year, like guys losing contain, guys not fitting gaps. It really like messed up his angles to the football, especially in terms of like making tackles. Like guys were getting pushed back into his lap. And I just think like if Goldman's in there, if Payne plays the way he can play, like I think you're going to see a very productive year from him. And I think the way that Joe Wood Jr. uses them in terms of blitzing and creating mismatches on running backs, mismatches on centers, and they both can kind of maximize those reps. And just the kind of devil may care, Tasmanian devil attitude that Frankie Louvu plays with. Like I think that right now feels like the best group or the most established group in the NFL. And I like the floor, and I also like the ceiling of them, especially with the addition of some of those defensive linemen that we talked about.
Yeah, this is the hard part too, is it's a dependent position. And it's hard to, like, if you switch Wagner and Louvu, and to me, this is like kind of what it comes down to. If you switch Wagner and Louvu with McFadden and Okereke, like, you definitely say the Giants. Like, you'd be like, Wagner and Louvu behind that defensive line?
It's a good point.
Holy crap. Yeah. And so, you get to play against or behind and with who you get to play with. Like the teams are the teams. We're evaluating on them on some level within their own context. But I do think that's a good tiebreaker to be like, well, who would I actually rather have? Like, I'd rather have the 2 Washington guys. And I like McFadden and Okereke a lot. But I would rather have the 2 Washington guys. What about Dallas? Like,
that looks like a mess right now, honestly. Like,
yeah, Overshown is a really, really good player, but that injury was nasty, man.
Yeah, it was like ACL, MCL, meniscus. It was like a myriad of stuff, and he's been injured 2 years in a row at some point. You know what I mean? So like, this would be his first healthy season since entering the NFL, and I love the player, but like, can you be healthy? and I don't know.
Well, and also, is he the same? I mean, this is a guy who's a freaky athlete. If you have that kind of knee construction, are you the same? Certainly in year one, nevertheless, ever, are you the same athlete ever again?
And like, honestly, looking at like when you read the names off, like even Murray was the other guy, right? He was with the Chargers. He was a former first round pick, like never really quite reached that level of expectation. And, it's been disappointing, honestly. And so Sanborn is a sneaky, really good football player who's in Chicago. Like every time he played, he'd have like 10 tackles. And I don't know what that's about. Like just a really hyper instinctive, intellectual, like great feel player. So I think he might end up starting there week 1. You know what I mean? Just because of like,
he's listed as the starter right now.
Yeah. So I like him a lot, but in terms of like athletic upside, not a great athlete. You know what I mean? He just is a good linebacker. And so that group to me feels like honestly the weakest one, like of the group. Like if you're looking at just say, hey, which is the most talented group, irrespective of injury, it's definitely the Eagles. Like you have a couple of the freakiest dudes like in the NFL playing linebacker, right? Zach Bond and Jihad Campbell, right? And obviously Nakobe Dean, when healthy, is a very intellectual, downhill, perfect kind of blitzing linebacker for that system, but he's hurt. So I would say if I'm picking, it's probably Washington, right? Like we just talked about the dynamic elements that they have. I think the depth there is actually kind of sneaky good also because we know it really well. And then I'd probably go I would go Philly. That's what my gut tells me, but it seems unfair because they're not healthy yet.
But like Zach Bond's healthy, and he's better than anything Dallas has.
That's Zach
Bond in a 4-1-5 or 4-1-6, alignment is a better linebacker than unit, quote unquote, than anything that they've got in Dallas.
To me, it would be the other one would be: is he better than the Giants? Right? Is right now is the Philly linebacker group better than the Giants group? And on paper, it is. But are they healthy would be the question. Are they going to be healthy week 1? And you're asking a rookie to play a lot, even though he is a first-round pick, and they loved him in terms of evaluation. So that would be my one thought. I'd probably go Philly. I'd probably go Washington, Philly, Giants, close between Philly and New York. And then the fourth would be Dallas, just because Dallas, to me, they're kind of a mess right now. Like, in terms of the injury, you're getting a retread linebacker, and I like Sanborn a lot, but one of 3 does not make a good group.
Also, shout out Maris Lufau, and just because the DC connection, that's Sonia Citron's boyfriend. They were together at Notre Dame.
Really?
Sony game-winning 3 over the weekend against the Dallas Wings, her best game of her WNBA career. So we have some small amount of love for a Dallas Cowboy, but it's all related to Sonia Citron and what she's doing. Anyway, the other thing I'll say about Dallas on a more substantive basis is their new DC is Matt Eberflus, who was one of the great linebacker coaches in the league and obviously a great DC. And so I am curious if he can get a little bit more out of that group. And obviously you said Sanborn was in Chicago, so he was with Flus, there. Yeah. But eventually, like, talent, it's a weird position. Mentals matter a lot. They matter a lot in terms of organization, of getting everyone else involved. But for you to do your job, there is an amount of athleticism that you need as well. And I don't know that the requisite amount is there. So I just think like the coaching is going to be high level. That is going to probably help get the best out of that group. I just don't think that the best out of that Dallas group is probably worth a whole lot. So they come in fourth. The Philly New York thing, that is so interesting.
Yeah, I think I don't know what to do with it, really, to be honest.
I wish I knew. If you tell me that Dean, because it really is kind of just Bond. If you take Dean and Campbell out of it, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's like, and for as good as he was last year, yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm fine. Giants fans, you got your name at the top of the D-line graphic. Sorry, you're dropping to third here.
Third? Wow.
Well, because that's what you said. You said it's right. Washington, New York. Like, it feels wrong.
You were talking about Philly. I thought you were talking about Philly. I was like, really? But anyway,
yeah, no, I think Zach Bond takes the cake. All right, that's it for the graphic, if you will. Washington, Philly, New York, Dallas. Wrapping up here on Take Command, last but certainly not least, the secondaries on our NFC East positional group rankings. Logan Paulson there, Craig Hoffman here. Let me run through the starters and any key depth pieces here for all four teams in the NFC East, and then we will rank how their secondaries stack up. So for Washington, you have Lattimore and Amos on the outside at corner. Sainer still on the inside at the nickel with Will Harris and Quan Martin as your safeties. According to ESPN.com, the current depth chart for the Eagles, Kenyon Mitchell and Keely Ringo on the outside. I will also mention Adoree Jackson in play there. Cooper DeJean, obviously, in the nickel. Reed Blankenship and the rookie Andrew Makuba are listed as safeties. Sidney Brown has also played a decent amount for them at safety as a backup depth piece that I'll mention. Deron Bland, opposite of Trayvon Diggs, question mark, in Dallas. Diggs still coming off the ACL, so we'll see. They also brought in Kyer Elam as depth and drafted Siobhan Ravel. In the nickel, Israel Mukumamu. I should know better than that, but it's a
doozy.
He's listed as a nickel. Haven't seen him play a whole lot. Not gonna lie, don't have a huge file there. Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker, Marquise Bell, the key guys at safety. And then the New York Giants, they spent some money this offseason on this secondary, Logan. Paulson Adebo, the free agent from New Orleans, is in opposite of Deontay Banks at corner. Tyler Nubin, Javon Holland, the free agent from Miami at safety. Drew Phillips in the nickel. Cordell Flott has been a key depth piece for them that's had to start every single year. And the Giants fans go, oh no, Cordell Flott again. Although he's had some nice moments. So that's the secondary, the key pieces. We can mention any other depth pieces as we go if they're relevant. But Logan, who stands out to you as having the best secondary in the NFC East?
Honestly, it's kind of like the Giants in a weird way. Like, I wasn't expecting that when we started the exercise. So let's just talk through it, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, Philly should be the group. And I'll tell you why I'm a little bit uncertain about Philly. And Philly is crazy talented, no doubt. I think everyone looks at what they did last year. Mitchell, Blankenship had a good year. Obviously, the guy in the slot from Iowa, I forgot his name already.
Cooper DeJean.
Yeah, Cooper DeJean. That's a pretty solid group. But you got a rookie potentially starting, Makuba, who I liked a lot coming out of Texas. Long, rangy kind of guy, skinny, but comes downhill, physical, a little bit of a projection. Sidney Brown has kind of been your special teams ace. If he has to play, he's never played. He's kind of played like a special teams guy, he's had some good moments, had some rough moments. And then Keely Ringo to start at corner is interesting because he's been there for, this is his third season. Is that right, Craig?
I think so, yeah.
Maybe? And he hasn't played really at all. And so, the reports right now coming out of OTAs are that he's playing well, but you're basically replacing two really significant starters. And I know Darius Slay wasn't playing at his best last year, but he's a savvy, instinctive, smart guy who's seen a bunch of different stuff. And now you're putting a guy in who's kind of the opposite of that, kind of this physical freak, but doesn't have the CPU wiring just yet. And Gardner Johnson was the safety there last year, if I'm not mistaken, who was a really good football player, very kind of an emotional lightning rod for that defense. And you're replacing him with a guy who plays in a similar way, but is a rookie, So I don't know. I look at that and I say there's a little bit of uncertainty there. And I compare that to the Giants as an example. I love Andrew Phillips, right? As the nickel, he's one of the better nickels in the NFL. So him and Cooper DeJean are kind of a wash. Paulson Adebo is a crazy consistent football player. His highs might not be that high, but he's incredibly consistent. Tyler Nubin was awesome as a rookie last year. He led the FBS in interceptions, whatever that was when he was coming out. So ball skills, and he's playing next to Javon Holland now, who again is not at the pinnacle of his career, but definitely not a bad football player.
He's still
anymore.
young. He's 25 years old.
Right, which is unbelievable to think about because I feel like he's been in the league for forever. But that group, I don't know. I just feel like the floor of that group is really, really high, And again, I think there are better players at select spots in the Philly secondary. I love Quinyon Mitchell. I love Cooper DeJean. I even love Reed Blankenship, but he's a limited football player. So 2 of 5 to me doesn't necessarily make a great secondary. And I just feel like this group, it's kind of like an offensive line. You need 5 good guys to play well. And I feel like that's kind of why I'm leaning towards the Giants. The one question I have is Deontay
Banks. Yeah.
because I love him from an athlete standpoint. I love the idea of him, but he has not played well in probably since his first 5 games of his rookie year, whatever that was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's been a long time. So a little uncertain about that, but it just seems like the floor is much more consistently high. And I think about it too, like when you're starting a rookie corner, like there's a developmental process there that every player has to go through. And that's one of those positions that's a very prominent developmental curve.
It was supposed to be for Kenyon Mitchell, and then he was one of the best corners in the entire NFL.
Yeah, what a psycho. Same with Cooper DeJean. What about that?
I know. That's my thing. My only pushback, if I'm going to play devil's advocate here, is
that's my initial gut reaction.
Yeah,
is like
I don't
there's
think
a lot more
DeJean
holes in the secondary.
I don't think DeJean and Phillips is a wash. I think DeJean's better.
No, I'm not saying it's a wash. What I'm saying is like,
well, you said it. So if you didn't mean it directly, let's clarify.
I think it depends on what you're doing defensively, right? Because I think if you want a guy in straight man coverage, Phillips is probably one of the best man nickel players in the NFL. Cooper DeJean for Philly, he does a lot of stuff, right? He's kind of like a safety nickel hybrid. He's not bad in man coverage, but like he doesn't have to, like he's a run player. He's more diverse in terms of skill set. So for that system, he's perfect. For what they were doing last year in New York, I think Phillips is damn near perfect as well, right? So I think there's stylistically, maybe that to clarify, there's a wash, but like in terms of football player, Cooper DeJean is probably a more consistent football player, if that makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. And I would say that the style that DeJean plays is more impactful. Like he impacts the game in more ways than like Phillips is really, really good. And it's like you said, like really, really good in the ways that he's really, really good. And they use him in those ways. But like, okay, if you're, I don't know, if we're into basketball analogies this week, maybe it's the NBA Finals. But like, if you are a great center who like swings the ball on the outside, and you're like, oh man, I'm really good at making that one extra pass. Like that's valuable. That's really important. But it's like not the same as being a dead-eye three-point shooter. Like that's a more valuable, or a guy who can shot create. Like that's a more valuable skill set. And I think DeJean is a guy that he forces turnovers. He's involved in the run game. He shuts stuff down in the passing game because he covers a ton of ground. Not to mention he's still good in man cover. Like I just think the impact, like he was the guy that when they inserted him into the lineup last year, that defense twisted into like a historically great unit. And Bond does, like, what's funny is he and Bond do very similar things. And they kind of can, opposite side of the field mirror each other in terms of the coverage responsibilities, in terms of how they're able to play the run. Obviously, Bond has the added pass rush, and DeJean's got more range as a guy who's a true DB versus Bond is a linebacker who can play really well as a coverage player. But it allows them to do a lot of stuff. And I just think that would be my counter argument is the ceiling of what Philly does is unlocked in many ways by Mitchell's ability to just shut down a guy and DeJean's ability to do all that stuff. And is that enough to overcome the solidness of Adebo, of Holland, of Newbin, of Phillips, et cetera, when they both have the outside corner question, which is very similar between Banks and Ringo?
So what I would say too is that, like, they don't really, a couple things there. This is good. I'm glad you brought this up because this is like, it gets the wheels turning, right? So they don't really play like a lot of straight man. It's like a match. You know what I'm saying? So like
they being Philly.
Yeah, they being Philly. So like Quinyon Mitchell, like in terms of his ability to like take a guy away, they don't really use him that way. You know what I mean? Like they're not like having him follow someone around a formation and really being in man coverage. So what I would say is that like he's good at the match stuff really well. Yeah. Slay was pretty good at the match stuff last year. I don't know. We'll see how the Ringo does with it. But in terms of that kind of inside triangle, like the nickel and the two safeties, all three of those guys were really good at the match thing. And you took one of them out. So, like, does that negatively impact? Now, again, to your point, I think this is a good point. Like, they have two of the better young defensive players in the NFL, right? But does that offset having a completely new piece playing safety? Who, say what you want about Gardner Johnson, like, he did a really good job with that stuff, quote unquote, that we're talking about.
Right. Right.
Whatever that weird match principles on the interior, right? So, like, that's the piece that I'm kind of the most worried about. Now, like you said, they've got Bond, they've got DeJean, they've got Quinyon Mitchell. They've got a lot of pieces there that can kind of offset some of that. But how much is it offset? And does having a new piece in the triangle on the interior? because again, like it allows you to put Blankenship in more advantageous matchups, like where he's not kind of the feature of the defense. And so like, does he have to take a larger role? And like, I like Makuba. I think he's going to be fine, but like it is a rookie projecting to a complicated defense. So that to me is somewhat concerning, but you're right. The other pieces there are really good, especially, I know we're not supposed to do this, but when you kind of insert Bond as that other element,
right.
Like, it's an interesting conversation for sure.
For sure. Like, and in some ways, I want to redo these rankings as like a separate show. So maybe this is the late July show. When your coaches, now we're going to re-rank the same players, but we're going to divide them up differently. It's like run defense, pass defense.
Sure.
Right. Like if you were to do that, I think it becomes a more interesting conversation. If we're doing pure secondary and kind of basing it more on the players, I totally get what you're saying about New York. Dallas is interesting. We can get to Washington in a second, obviously, and we've spent plenty of time talking about their secondary as well and kind of the potential upside, but also the potential downside. Sure. And in some ways, we have some similar stuff in Dallas. Deron Bland is an excellent player who has been a like world-class
right?
type
he plays
of quarter.
Nickel for them mostly?
No, he played on the outside, especially when he had all those picks a couple years ago. And then, Ravel, who knows what he is as a rookie. Diggs, who knows if he's healthy, which, I mentioned Ravel because he obviously could wind up starting for them. Kyer Elam, interesting guy. Hooker and Wilson, I think, are very solid at safeties,
players,
but they're, what are they in an Eberflus defense versus what they were last year in a Zimmer defense versus we know how good they were under DQ and kind of how those guys specifically were used. So, I don't know. In some ways, I feel like very solid about this pass defense unit, this secondary unit that in Dallas, but it really does depend on Diggs' ability to come back. And I don't know that they have like the depth in many ways. Like we're gonna talk about Washington. It just feels like there's some thinness to this group that and a lack of upside potentially. Although I say that, but also Diggs and Bland have two of the greatest interception seasons we've seen in the last 10 years of the league. Individually, it's just those are a while ago at this point.
I think that's the other thing, too, that's kind of tough is like with secondaries in general, like it is so up and down in terms of production. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so Quinyon Mitchell had one of the better seasons of any DB last year, but he could regress this year. Like, that happens all the time, So I think that's another thing about defensive back play that's tough. So, like, maybe you got to bet on athletes more. And I don't know. Like, I like Dallas's secondary. I like the safeties in particular. I think they're just good football players. To me, they're very fun to watch. I am a little uncertain about Diggs. Like statistically, he's always been very, favorable because of the interceptions, the turnovers, all those types of things that he does. But he does give up a lot of yards. He does take a lot of gambles. And like, how does that fit with a new defensive coordinator? Bland, I think, is very instinctive to the football, has great ball skills, but is not the best athlete in the whole world, right? So it just is there's always these deficiencies. And I do think with that group specifically, it's hard to know because it's kind of like, what do they become? And like, so they need to mention Siobhan Ravel. Like, I liked him a lot coming out, but I do think there is in terms of things that Dan Quinn has talked about post-drafting Trey Amos, things that are important to DB, and conversations I've had with multiple DB coaches, like ball skills, like his ball skills were great. You know what I mean? So like, does he become the next Benjamin St. Juste, or does he become a dominant defensive player? Like, so those are questions that I have about that group. Kyer Elam has really struggled badly.
Yeah. Buffalo has needed a corner for a long time, and Kyer Elam, they drafted in 2022. He only played 3 games in 23, and then he wasn't very good last year. And that's why Buffalo had to go address corner again, is because they've been searching for corners for years, despite spending a first-round pick on Kyer Elam in 2022.
Yeah, so he's struggled badly. So again, it doesn't feel like a great group, but again, they've got some good players in there, right? And it just depends on with Eberflus how that things comes together. Like with Philly, like I'm very confident that the guys we talked about are going to play well. Like they're just good football players, right? There's no injury concern, right? There's a youth concern at 2 spots, right? An inexperience concern, right? Here, it's just like, how does that group come together is the more concerning element. And the consistent thing is the safeties, and they're kind of a specific type of safety. They're more box players. They can do multiple things, but I kind of think of them as more downhill type of box players. So it's just tough because of this is exactly why. Because of the volatility of Diggs and how he plays the game, it makes it really hard to evaluate this group specifically, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of volatility, I have no idea what to do with Washington for the same exact reason. Like, who's Marshawn Lattimore at this point? Like,
right.
If he's good, the secondary could be all right. If he's bad, Saner's still inside. And like, look, we've done this a million times, but I will run through the highlights in case there's fans of other podcasts listening to try to get some, or other teams listening that are trying to get a Washington perspective on Washington. And if you've made it this far, 50-something minutes into this, and you're not getting it, God bless you. Thank you for listening. Mike Sainer still, we really liked last year, but playing inside is not what he did last year. He wound up playing outside. So he's in a new position. Trey Amos, we like a lot, had a very good spring. He's a rookie. Marshawn Lattimore, shrug emoji.
Who knows?
Will Harris, we both like him way too much, but like we acknowledge that we like him way too much. How good is he? We're gonna find out. And Quan Martin's a good football player. From a depth standpoint, like Jonathan Jones, I feel pretty good about as a depth piece at corner.
It's been a nice ad. That was a nice ad.
Yeah. Percy Butler, I think you like more than I do as a safety, but
special teams.
Yeah, great special teams guy.
He's kind of like Sidney Brown. He's like Sidney Brown for Philly.
Yeah, and so is Jeremy Reeves. Butler's probably a better safety than Reeves, but like there's just not a ton of depth there that, God forbid, something happens. So, the other thing I'll mention is because we didn't mention these guys at all in the linebacker group, like Hampton and Madrano. Like, does one of those guys kind of wind up playing a Zach Bond-ish role at times in this defense? You know, guys that have really tremendous movement skills, but like obviously saying a Zach Bond-ish role is very different than like, hey, are you going to go be the third guy in Defensive Player of the Year voting like Bond was last year? So I don't know what to do with this group, man. Noah Igbenoghene's back too from a depth piece, like good depth piece, not a guy you want to play starters minutes if you can help it for more than a week or two. So yeah, man, this to me is like the biggest question mark on Washington's team. And so I don't really know what to do with it.
Yeah. And you said that before, and I think it's very astute of you. So what I would say is I feel pretty good, like not amazing, pretty good about the interior triangle. So like nickel and both safety spots. I think those are good football players. I think Quan has the potential to be something special. And I think we've seen Will Harris, like, the flexibility, does it add an element of dynamism? Does it allow Joe Wood Jr. to get into more coverages? Possibly. I think Mike Sanderstill is a special football player. Yeah, like how does he handle first and second down? I think that's something that, like with Cooper DeJean, like that was excellent by him last year. And it let them do a lot of stuff in terms of defensive coverages. Like he's good in that area. Sanderstill, like when he had to do that early, it seemed like he was fine, but was a little uncomfortable because it's big, it's fast, it's a little bit nasty in there. So how does he do with that? But I feel pretty confident about that interior triangle. Trey Amos, after watching spring, I think is going to be at some point a good football player, right? He's a rookie. So does that happen? It's the same thing. It's the same conversation with Kylie Ringo, right? Like I am, after hearing the reports, after watching the athlete, like I think at some point he's going to be a fine starting player. Like what does that look like? Probably like a C to B range this year. But like, when does it happen, and when does he get burned? And again, like when you're matching up against AJ Brown, when you're matching up against Devontae Smith, Malik Neighbors, CeeDee Lamb, like there's some tough outs there, right? And so I feel relatively confident it's going to be good, but he's a rookie player. To your point, it almost feels like it's the same conversation you're having about Stephon Diggs here with Marshawn Lattimore. Like Trayvon Diggs. God, Trayvon Diggs, right? So there is an uncertainty because of the injury. There's also an uncertainty because of the play style over the last couple of years, like where he's at. And I think the same conversation can be had about Marshawn. So like when you actually compare these two groups on paper, like what did we feel good about with Dallas? It's probably the interior triangle, pretty good, right? And Bond, I think it'd be a good player, right? But it's that other spot that leaves you with a lot of uncertainty. So I don't know. Like it's crazy. It's interesting going through New York and why I probably felt so good about him, because there's not a lot of questions. Like there's not a lot of questions about the group, right? Because they've brought in experienced players, right? They've brought in a lot of experienced pieces. And then the talent of Philly is tremendously high, right? And then there's all these questions with the last two groups, and I think that's why it's a tough group to evaluate. So I don't know, man. It's I would probably say, based on this conversation, that they'd be the fourth in the division. But I think it's close. I think it's almost like a tie between them and Dallas at the moment.
So I'm willing to make the case for Washington third, because
I'm fine with that.
Do you have a file on Israel Mukwamu, the guy who's allegedly playing
what numbers
nickel for Dallas? Number 24, he's listed as a safety, but he's currently listed, he's listed positionally as a safety. 6'4", 205, 2021 6th-round pick out of South Carolina. And he's currently on ESPN.com's depth chart listed as their nickel. Now, that might be me not knowing who the actual nickel is going to be. But, when we talk about the interior triangle, this dude's got, 19 career, last season had 19 tackles. He's got 42 career tackles.
See, he's
been elite since 21.
I think in a perfect world, they want Deron Bland to play the nickel, because he's on our lads, which is the depth chart. He's listed as the nickel. So if you have Deron Bland, Donovan Wilson, and Malik Hooker playing your interior triangle, that's a pretty damn good group. And I think last year,
but then you've got either Ravel or Elam outside,
which is terrible. Either way, you don't feel great about that. Either way, you know what I'm saying? So. And
again, Ravel might be good eventually, but he tore his ACL last year. He is not only a rookie; he's a rookie coming off of an ACL.
So, if you do it that way, I think you probably put Washington ahead of it, right? Because
that's kind of my thing.
Yeah, the questions at the outside corners are probably going to be.
We got two dudes with high volatility, healthy, coming off ACLs.
Yeah,
I think I'd rather take Marshawn Lattimore coming off the hamstring with that volatility of him. And the volatility of a healthy rookie in Trey Amos, which again isn't great, but I think I'd rather go that route.
So where do we go? Philly, New York, Washington, Dallas.
I'll defer to you on New York, Philly. I think you like New York better.
I don't know if I like the floor of New York better. I think the talent in Philly is crazy. You know what I'm saying? When you look at the talent,
I think at some point you have to. We'll make up for. Sorry, Philly fans. We put Jalen Hurts behind Dak Prescott after he's.
I'm going to stand by that. I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, should we switch him? This is the thing I'll say about that real quick. I know we're talking defense. This is the thing I just want to get off my chest.
Yeah.
The other positions, offensive line, pass catchers, and running back are the best in the division and maybe the best in the NFL. It's hard to me. To say that a guy who struggles in some of the ways that Jalen Hurts struggles is the best. I don't know. He's just there's so much support there. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
I don't know.
Totally. But at some point, it's well, man, I know all of these guys are really awesome, but it's the most important position in the sport. And he's been to two of the last 3 Super Bowls and played really well in those games. So
in the Super Bowls, yeah. He has played well in the Super Bowls. And
he's a big game player. I think we both like Jalen Hurts for what he is. It's just recognizing what he is. The point I was making on the defensive side though is if we're gonna use hey, they just won the Super Bowl behind a historically great defense as a tiebreaker, and the secondary was a huge part of that. I have no problem. And the Giants had the 3rd overall pick. I have no problem going Philly over New York.
But I think there are two. The reason that it's not a knockout of the park Philly is they got 2 new starters, right? So and 100%. I like both of them on paper. It's just they're new, and so you never know how that's going to jive. But Blankenship and all those guys are DeJean and Mitchell are good football players. So
all right, Philly, New York, Washington, Dallas. That's it.
So what was Philly? They were second linebackers, second defensive line. God, they're a good team, man. That's just a good football team.
They're worse than last year. That's the good news. The bad news is they were one of the best rosters in recent NFL, if not pure NFL history last year. So good luck. Here we go. How's their coaching? We'll talk about that next week. Obviously, they do have some new folks in places. So we will discuss the head coaches, offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators on next week's show in between a mailbag on Monday. So get your questions in, hoffmanshow.com. Use the contact link or on Instagram at hoffman.sports or at Logan_Paulson82. For Logan, I'm Craig, and we will see you next time on Take Command.